Hey folks, so we've been in our new unit, the Renaissance. It's that fancy French word that means rebirth. And we already talked about the Renaissance art and how after the Crusades and after the plague, they still cared about the religion, it was still very important to them, but they also just started focusing on the natural world and humans and science and lots of other interests kind of crept back in because they realized, hey, life is short and we want to enjoy life here. And so that started creeping into their art. It's also going to creep into their literature, going to creep into their writing. And then eventually we're going to look at their science and technology as well. So there's a couple famous people we want to talk about. First one, William Shakespeare, came out of this time period. Now he is from England. Okay, he's from England. You might have seen paintings or portraits of him like this, William Shakespeare. He's from England, which is that little red blop on the map there in Europe. Okay, we live way over here in North America, in Pennsylvania. And then he lived a long time ago in England, right over here. Okay, we're going to zoom in. We've talked about a lot of these places this year. Here is Europe. Okay, we've talked about Greece down here, Turkey, Jerusalem's over here. We talked about Italy and Germany, and we talked about France and Spain. North Africa, okay, Morocco is over here. But here, this red spot right here, this is England, okay, or Great Britain. He's known for being he's probably the most famous English playwright of all time. So he wrote plays and sonnets, poems. Some of his most famous ones are Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet. He wrote one about Julius Caesar, and A Midsummer's Night Dream. Some people think he's the best playwright of the English language. It's opinion, but he did write a lot of famous ones, and you might read some someday. He wrote comedies and tragedies, just like the ancient Greeks did. So he, again, in the Renaissance, they kind of like to go back to the style of the ancient Greeks and Romans. So we got our comedies and tragedies. But Shakespeare is also going to bring in some histories. He liked to write about history as well. So true stories. All right, so a lot of his ideas for his plays came from the history of either England, where he lived, or Rome. He liked to write about the Romans a lot, and the Italians. He liked to write about the Italians. Many of his characters were Italian. We already talked about some of his famous plays, so we'll keep it moving. This is a cool clip that you can click on to actually hear somebody read some lines from Hamlet, from a Shakespeare play, to hear what it would sound like. We listened to that in class. They believe that Shakespeare created over 1,700 words. That he would just invent words and phrases all the time. If he didn't have one, if one didn't exist to describe what he wanted to, he would just make one up. Here's a list of some. We looked at a video in class of some. So anytime somebody gets on your case about using some slang or making up a phrase, just tell them, hey, Shakespeare did it, and now all those are in the dictionary. Okay. He was part of an acting company, and his company built a theater called the Globe Theater. It did burn down, but was eventually rebuilt, and you can go visit the rebuilt one. It looks like this. Okay, it's circular. We've got our stage here. We've got some seating up here underneath the roof. And then people stand down along the stage as well. We watched a virtual tour of his theater, so feel free to check that out right there on the Pear Deck on Canvas. A couple famous movies you may have seen, you may not. Some of these are kind of dated. They're from like when I grew up, so they're kind of old now. But a lot of movies and plays and TV shows like to borrow ideas from Shakespeare. For example, this one's called She's the Man. Borrowed themes from one of his plays called The Twelfth Night. The Lion King is based on Shakespeare's work Hamlet. West Side Story, if you've ever seen that, is based on Romeo and Juliet. There's actually a lot of movies and shows about Romeo and Juliet. The Taming of the Shrew is Shakespeare's play, and the movie 10 Things I Hate About You is inspired by that. Okay, now real quick, I had to pause it, get something ready for you. Real quick, for Shakespeare, there are going to be a couple other clips, some funny things that I show you in class that we'll watch together. But I want to show you and kind of explain the assignment, what you're working on. You're going to be doing an internet scavenger hunt. Okay, internet scavenger hunt for Shakespeare. You can find it posted on Canvas. It's an embedded Google Doc. It will be a version that you can type on. It's got a bunch of questions about Shakespeare and his life and his accomplishments. And what you're going to do is basically go down through, Google these, use Google, use whatever search engine, Wikipedia, whatever websites you normally do to find information for your projects. And you're basically going to try to find this information about Shakespeare and fill in these boxes. And then once it's done, just share it with me, submit it on Canvas, share it on Google Docs, however you want to. And I will give you some points for your research. Okay, I'm just going to give you kind of a general feel for Shakespeare, his life, and some of his accomplishments. Okay, so I just want to show that to you real quick before we move on. Now we're going to move on to some other Renaissance literature. There is one other famous, author that we want to talk about is Miguel de Cervantes. And he wrote a famous book called Don Quixote. He was Spanish, by the way. And it's a story about Don Quixote, who is an elderly knight. He reads these romance novels and books, and he dreams of a different time where knights would defend people and go on adventures. And so he sets out on a very old horse with his squire, okay, his kind of partner, and they basically go on adventures. Another famous book from the time, and we're going to kind of look into Don Quixote a little closer in a second. Another famous book from the time is called The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. If I pronounce his last name wrong, my apologies. If you speak Italian or are familiar with Dante's work, let me know. Okay, I'd love to fix that. Okay, and it's a very long poem about a poet who goes through these three stages: the Inferno, Purgatory, and then Paradise. So it has some religious themes to it as well. So there's some famous ones you might check out someday. Okay, here is a YouTube video about Miguel de Cervantes. Okay, that you can check out. A little summary of Don Quixote. Okay, to get you familiar. And then the final Renaissance literature project you will have is on ClassKick, and these are posted on Canvas. There is a worksheet called The Impossible Dream. And it says impossible. It is spelled incorrectly, I know, but it's a pun. Okay, and you'll see why in a second. And you are answering, filling in the blanks, circling the questions, answering the questions. This is based on a very old, very corny TV show that used to be on when I was a kid. And it was called Wishbone. And what they used to do is they would wheel in these TVs that were on carts with these big VHS players into our classroom when I was a kid. And they would put these VHS tapes into the player, they'd turn on the TV, and we would sit and we would watch Wishbone. And Wishbone was this dog that went on adventures in history and relived books and stories and things that happened. Specifically on YouTube, and I'm going to post a link to this on Canvas as well, there is one called Wishbone, The Impossible Dream. Okay, and see it's paws because he's a dog and he has paws. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to watch this Wishbone episode, and I'm going to warn you before you watch it. It is corny, it's goofy, but some of y'all might find you secretly like it and watch some other Wishbone episodes. Okay, but you're going to watch this episode, and while you're watching it, you're going to be filling out these questions, okay, and working on coming up with the answers and submitting them. Now, when they're done, okay, just put the hand raised symbol on so I know you're done. If I don't get to it, send me an email to remind me, okay. Now, there's a chance, depending on how things shake down, we may end up doing some of this in class and watching some of this in class. But if we don't, I wanted to just show you, hey, you have these questions, okay, right here on the ClassKick that's posted on Canvas. It's about Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote book, and then this is the video that goes with it, okay, just in case we don't get to it in class. All right, folks, if you have any questions about this Shakespeare scavenger hunt or this Wishbone activity, send me an email, pull me aside, I'll help you out, and we'll take care of it. All right, thanks, folks.